What's up, everybody? This is the show. I'm your host, Rob Blatt, and welcome to the Adult Nerd Podcast. First, thank you for listening. I want to thank you for listening as we start this show together. If you're listening in the first few days or the first few weeks as this show is released, you're probably a friend or a family member of mine or one of the guests. And for that, thank you for downloading and taking the time to listen. Episode 1, Everybody Has a Passion. I've got a good friend on the show today, someone that I wanted to start this with. We're talking about projects and how as you create projects in your life and as you move forward, you never really leave them behind. A good way to finish something is to have a deadline, but ultimately, projects are never fully done. And we talk about that a lot as my guest has jumped around a little bit professionally and in terms of education. However, the thing that we discuss throughout here is the thread that you have that goes through everything that you've done and what that means moving forward, never really letting go. And that's not necessarily a bad thing that you don't let go of a project or you never finish a project. You may release it, but as we discuss, we go back to it, much like loading up an old video game and jumping into an old save. How it can transport you to the mindset that you had going into that project, whether that be code or music or writing, whatever it might be. So enjoy the conversation. The introductions each week are going to be fairly short. I'm going to make a call right now. If you are someone who collects comic books and you have a great way that you have kept track of what books you've got, I have a somewhat of a sizable collection and no idea of what's in my long boxes outside of just kind of what I know that I've collected in my head. And I'm looking to find a way to catalog them. I haven't found something good yet. I would love it if I could have that be connected to a database that I can access on my phone or on my machine. I don't care that it's free or it's paid. That doesn't matter as much to me. But right now, the thing that's difficult is actually keeping track of everything that I've got. I'm trying to avoid an Excel spreadsheet. I think that's for the best for everyone, but I have a feeling that I may not have an option for that. But if you've got something, let me know. Twitter is Rob Blatt, ROBBLATT, or you can email me. It's rob@robblatt.com. The Adult Nerd email is not set up yet. The Adult Nerd Twitter account is in limbo right now as I forgot the password and no longer have access to an old email address. I've rambled long enough. I want you to enjoy this week's episode and enjoy this week's interview. Thank you. One note before we actually start, and that's the audio quality on my side is not up to my own standards. However, I didn't feel it was necessary to go back and re-record everything that I said after the fact in this interview. With that being said, now you can enjoy. This week's nerd is Gavin St. Gavin, welcome to the Adult Nerd.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Episode 1, I definitely wanted to start with someone that I've not only podcasted with before, but probably has started the most projects that I've been jealous of anyone that I know.
Jealous of? Wow.
Yeah. So almost 10 years ago, we met for the first time at PodCamp Montreal.
Yeah.
An offshoot of the bar camp movements that were happening, and I assume still happen, although I'm not up to speed on them. And we met and decided for NaPodPoMo, which is National Podcast Post Month, we were going to try to get through the month of November that year of 2008 by recording an episode every single day.
Yeah.
And releasing it. And we were unsuccessful.
But hey, what a journey.
Yes, and we tried that. I think for a few different years we made an attempt to get that done and failed each year. However, the show, which was called Put It in Your Ears, which still somewhere on the internet exists, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. It's a classic.
Over 140 some odd episodes, I believe. We started that project together. And so starting this project, I felt it was appropriate to start with you. Let's talk about some of these projects that you've undertaken the last few years.
That's one hell of an intro also, by the way. Thank you. It means a lot to be there. Your first guest. I think this is I'm excited to hear this podcast. but probably starting with episode 2, just because I'm still weird about hearing my own voice all of these years later.
You have produced podcasts, you have developed and released apps, you have a book that is available on Amazon.com. Let's start with the book, actually, because I think that was kind of the first non-Rob project I was aware of as we were friends. So you were, 10 years ago, what were you doing professionally 10 years ago?
Oh, geez. Okay, so it's 2018, 2008. I was working. There was actually a good portion of 2008, at least the first half. All right, yeah, I lost a job. That's right. Okay, it's all coming back to me.
There we go.
I was pretty mismatched for every job I had, in the sense that I was just bored and hated my jobs. I worked with some very nice people and fine people, but I think I had started a job where I was hired on to do some web development, but the people who had hired me had kind of interviewed me for one job, and then when I was brought on for, actually showed up and started going to work, that the job turned out to be something totally different. That it was a bit more of like, so you have really good skills with drilling down into Google Analytics and putting together some analytics reports and marketing strategies and stuff for, they started saying things like conversions and conversion rates, and they were talking to me like on my first day on orientation of this job, like as though I knew all of this stuff, which I didn't. I was aware of, I can put your Google Analytics tags into a site, but someone else always handles the data to figure out, the magic formulas to actually make a company money. Mm-hmm. And it turned out, like, gradually dawning on me, they're really expecting me to help them make a whole lot of money based on the analytics data that they get. And so I kind of said, well, I don't really know this stuff. And then it was a long pause, and they said, well, I guess you can learn, maybe. And so it was very awkward because I thought it was going to be something, and it was this very I was only there for a few months, and it was this prolonged stretch where we both realized we were both realizing it was a terrible fit. But again, everybody I was working with was super nice. It was just incredibly awkward. On the day I got fired, and this is the nicest way I've ever been fired. This poor woman, she'd never fired anyone before. In Mount Vernon in Baltimore, they have all these old 1920s mansions that have either been converted into apartments or businesses have taken over. But we're on one floor, and it's kind of an open floor plan, and there's no place to have a private conversation. And so she pulled me into the supply closet, and she was trembling. And I just remember trying to reassure her that it was all okay, that it was going to be all right, that there's no hard feelings.
The heavy lifting there.
Yeah, and I just, it's gotta suck to have to fire somebody. So that was early 2008. What the heck else happened that year? Oh yeah, and then I started a job. I ended up temporarily working for T. Rowe Price, doing HTML emails.
I don't want to call these jobs necessarily dead end.
I would,
but they certainly weren't. Yeah, they certainly weren't hitting where you wanted to be.
I can tell you a quick story about the T. Rowe Price job.
Oh, please do.
So they had a couple of different tiers of people working, and this was in their communications department. So you had people who were full-time employees of T. Rowe Price. I was working through some placement agency. So I was a contractor working through some company. It's hard to believe that no one thought about it and didn't do this on purpose. But there was a day that they had a big picnic. It was beautiful weather, and they had volleyball nets set up outside, and it was catered, but only full-time employees were allowed to go. Well, I worked in this first floor, windows everywhere. It was great. We got all kinds of great light, but the downside was On this day, I'd say about 90% of everybody in this office was outside having a good time. But because of some quirk in the HR policy, anybody who's a contractor had to stay inside and keep working. So there was a small handful of us just watching everyone outside, enjoying themselves and having food and laughing. And then someone came in to use the bathroom and saw us all like, do you guys want to, I can bring you some food. You want some food? I'm like, yes, we'll take food. And then the guy like left and never came back.
Oh, God.
And I think that was about the time that I started thinking, I should probably, maybe this isn't for me.
The decision that you had to make to not only leave that job, but also you just kind of took a left turn completely. You went back to school.
Yeah.
You made an enormous decision to scuttle everything up until that point and go in a different direction.
Yeah, it was around that time. I had a bunch of friends of mine were talking about a creative writing MFA program at the University of Baltimore. And I was always into writing. Writing's always been one of my favorite things to do. And I figured this would be a great way to actually, I don't know what it was, just do more of it. I think I was craving the structure of it. Mm-hmm. It's a fantastic program. I'm so happy I did this. And this actually became sort of a catalyst for a bunch of big decisions that I made that ended up changing my life. But it started with the MFA, and where I just got to do a lot of writing, and I got to hang out with really cool, interesting people who are also writing, poets, visual artists, short fiction writers, and made a bunch of friends there. And I was working. I probably had some other job at that point that I can't remember. I remember, because I ended up working at UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where there was a lot of crossover between my MFA at University of Baltimore. They're all part of the University of Maryland system, and but it was cool because I got to work at a place where a lot of my colleagues were either teachers at this program or also students or alums of the program. And so that kind of, even though I was working full time and doing the MFA was kind of this thread that went through everything. One of the things I was looking at was not just e-publishing. At the time, we called it e-publishing. Now we just call it, you get a book, you rate it on your Kindle. There's no qualifying. But it was interesting because that really wasn't super long ago. And people weren't quite sure about this whole Kindle and ebook thing. Is this really going to take off? Is this really going to be the future? And I just thought, hell yeah, I don't want to carry I love all of my friends who are writers, but when you have 20 friends that are writers, you don't want to carry around all of their books. And it just became like a practical thing. And then I got really interested in the technology behind it.
And the Kindle had been released in 2008, I think it was. Or it was announced in 2008, where...
Really?
They had...
Why did I think it was earlier?
They had... it might have been 2007 at the earliest, because I was working for a newspaper in Manhattan when it was announced. The Kindle was brand new. No one knew how anything was going to be actually displayed on it or how it was going to be long term. The Kindle was released November 19th, 2007. 10 years.
Wow.
That's a full 10 years ago for $400.
Good. Really?
Yeah.
God.
Essentially what you're talking about at that point, it was, 2 years old. You're talking about publishing to this expensive gadget at the time.
It was kind of cool because it was something that nobody at my school knew about or knew how to do. And there were people that were teaching digital publishing, and a lot of it was talking about, setting up a blog, setting up a WordPress site, and finding different ways to publish your writing to get people to read it, and how to submit to publications online, which seems even silly to have to think about. But it was really interesting. And I had come from, I was always interested in web development and, podcasting. Like, we had been podcasting and everything technology. And it was really interesting to run into a bunch of writers who really hadn't thought that, I need to somehow have some kind of an online presence. I mean, Twitter was maybe 2 years old at this point, so nobody had Twitter. It's like, are you on Twitter? And people would give me stares like, what? Why? What is this? Like every time I would bring up some kind of a technology in discussion, it would be like, this is a thing I have to worry about now? Thanks, Gavin. Jeez.
To some degree, when we're talking professionally and what you were doing, you're always pushing towards that leading and bleeding edge of what was brand new and what was commercially available at that moment. Wanting to be in that spot when something launches or in the early years of that.
Yeah, and it's always been exciting for me too when there's something new, or it's that I like with the Kindle or when you have this idea, you're gonna kind of get a glimpse of what something could be. That was always very exciting to me, and it was really interesting to dig into figuring out how to take a book that I had written for the MFA program and put it onto the Kindle. A big part of the program was also designing the print book, which had been part of the curriculum for years at that point, doing the book cover, doing the layout, and it was really great because I got to take typography classes and really at least touch every part of the physical act of publishing a book. I just had to add on this extra task of figuring out how to make a Kindle book. And at the time, the tools were pretty limited and the layout was pretty janky. And it was a lot of just experimenting with, I mean, it still can be. I still get books on the Kindle where layout issues are a problem. And it was really interesting to think about or try to figure out, right, why is that laying out weird? What's going on? And I was kind of going through the act of debugging this thing. But beyond that, I was also thinking about different ways people could use technology to interact with stories. And I had this idea. It was like a choose your own adventure book, but all the users would write pages, and it would be kind of like half game, half creative game, half a choose your own adventure interactive website. And I was kind of sketching out some ideas about it, and then I realized I have no idea how to do this, but this is something that I want to do. And I talked to one of my colleagues at UMBC who he was a software engineer who built this student portal for where students can talk to each other. All the on-campus groups could have their own groups and pages set up. And it's an interesting thing because it's an idea that they were doing, excuse me, that has failed so many times before, because students will largely just default to Facebook or the existing tools. But this was so tightly connected to student accounts and the student community. It was just a pleasure to use. And so I was talking to my colleague who was working on this and leading these students who were learning how to program and build this thing and fix bugs and add features. And I said, what are you using? What alchemy and magic is this? Because I need to learn this. And he said, it's a thing called Ruby on Rails. I said, Ruby on Rails. This I need to check out. So I bought a couple of books on top of finishing this MFA, trying to learn.
So you started the development side of what you were doing while still in school and while still also working full time.
Yeah, this was sort of, but this was kind of like the germ of the idea of what to do next. Right. And I realized how deep this rabbit hole went. And I need a lot of time to really learn how to fully wrap my head around these concepts of web development and Ruby on Rails, this programming language, this framework that is written with it, and how to build something that people can interact with and set up a server that will run it. And it's up to that point I had been doing, I think I was building some WordPress themes, was about as intense as my web development went. But that was still fun. I liked doing that. I liked being able to create something that somebody could use, or I could use on my own site and put something on the web. But this felt like a next step to get to. I'm wrapping up this MFA. I have the book published. I have it on the Kindle. And
what's next? Obviously the question becomes, what are you going to do? You have this education that you have now spent 4 years on, and you have you have a book to show that you are no slouch, and you have that, you have work under you. The book did somewhat, if I recall from, a number of years ago, the book did somewhat well. You sold out of the paperbacks at first, I believe, and then the Kindle version was doing well. And so what do you do with this new MFA?
The short version is I moved to San Francisco and learned how to become a web developer.
So hold on. So you had spent this time learning a craft, and I really want to talk about the decision to make another left turn. Like, do you remember making that decision to say, like, all right, I know I have done this, and I know this is what I've spent X number of hours on or years of my life. However, I think it's all pushing in this direction for me.
I do. I can tell you exactly the moment. It was right after I had I was wrapping everything up with the MFA. And I was in the position where I had a job at UMBC. The job had changed a bit. And I could tell that it was sort of the same pattern. I really like the people I'm working with. The job is probably not a great fit. And it just happened to coincide with the end of this program, the Creative Writing and Publishing Arts MFA at UB. And I was just kept thinking, all right, what next? Well, I was dating my girlfriend at the time, now wife. We were in a long distance relationship. She was down in Atlanta and I was in Baltimore, and I was finishing things up and just thinking like, I don't need to stay in Baltimore. What is it I want to do next?
You have your future wife who lives maybe 1,000 miles south of you.
Yeah. And she and I were,
you want to close that distance maybe, right?
Exactly. That was a big part of it. And we were both sort of in similar places with our careers where we knew that like, this isn't quite what it is we wanted to be doing. We didn't know what it is that the thing we really wanted to be doing was yet, but we both figured we should, let's try something new. Let's go someplace new together. Let's figure something out. But we didn't know exactly where or what that would be or what that would look like. We just knew that we wanted to push ourselves. We also wanted to be in the same city. We wanted to be together. There was somebody I was following on Twitter. I just happened to be on Twitter. And if I hadn't been on Twitter in this particular maybe 10-minute time frame, I have no idea what my life would look like now. It was someone on Twitter who I ended up becoming friends with, Mehran Park. He posted something to Twitter about, hey, I just got into Dev Bootcamp. I'm going to go learn Ruby on Rails. And I thought, what is this Dev Bootcamp? Ruby on Rails.
The light goes off.
Yeah, like what is this? Open up the old Google machine. And Dev Bootcamp is now closed. Isn't a thing anymore. The wave of the programmer boot camps is, I think, kind of waning. But at the time, it was this startup in San Francisco, and they had a very lofty promise of learn how to become a web developer in 9 weeks. And I thought, well, that's kind of crazy. I don't know that that's possible, but I'm not starting from zero here. I know a little bit of JavaScript. I know
you've made some HTML emails in your day.
I have cranked out some great table-based email templates with all of the blandness of a corporate entity could possibly desire, but it seemed really exciting. It was this idea of, and Sophia and I started talking about it. Well, why don't we're both into development. She was a developer for a company I don't know if she wants me to mention on the podcast. Let's just say a major cable news outlet based in Atlanta. They keep it nice
living
and
in Atlanta,
nice,
they give it away.
nice and vague.
Yes.
That's fine. She doesn't care, I assume. We didn't have the jobs we wanted, and we also didn't have really the skills we wanted. We wanted to learn more. We wanted to work places where we could get pushed and learn a lot more. And so I looked at this thing and said, I think I want to do this. I was reading about Dev Bootcamp, and I think this is kind of I had just finished this, just finished the MFA. Let's do more school. And I guess I haven't really thought about it until I'm saying it out loud right now, but there's something about just being completely immersed in the thing that you want to get better at. And it seemed like this was a really cool, weird very startup feel to it, where it's like just a bunch of crazy people put this thing together and like, we don't know if it's going to work. Let's try it. It's an experiment. You want to be a part of it?
And how immersed, when you say immersed, how immersed were you in this?
So it was really intense. It ended up being about 12 weeks because we were so new to it that they were trying to figure out the curriculum, and we were invited to stay on. Our cohort was invited to stay on for an extra 3 weeks. So it ended up being 12 weeks.
So you moved to San Francisco. You moved into the boot camp, basically?
I rented a house with 4 other guys who were in this cohort. And
some people say Silicon Valley is not real, but other people have different opinions.
Yeah, so when the show Silicon Valley came out, I'm like, I think I've met all of these people for real. It is amazing. But we had this great house that we rented. It was 24 hours a day for 12 weeks. All we did was eat, breathe, sleep. We dreamt in code. It was intense. So we would get up every morning. We would walk through Chinatown to where Dev Bootcamp was. And it was just on the second floor of this building where it was as San Francisco as it could get. It was kind of like 12 weeks of flailing and building things and breaking things and building things. And by the end, we were kind of coming up with ideas and building these small web apps and sort of like mini startups on our own. And it was such a fun time to take ideas like and then I started building this idea that I had at my MFA, this weird choose your own adventure thing built on Rails. I actually was able to build it and then break it and spectacularly and then fix it and then build it again. And it was just this really cool combination of these things that I had been doing for all of these years, all kind of coming together in a really cool city. But at the same time, I was also writing. I continued writing. But, so we had Dev Bootcamp ended, and I wound up working for a company there for a few years doing web apps. I was a JavaScript developer. The cool thing about San Francisco is it still has this great art scene. It's at the time was kind of getting priced out, which broke my heart. I would go to readings, and you'd have these tremendous writers who would have stories, these heartbreaking stories about how the tech companies were ruining the city that they loved and had lived in for their entire lives. Sometimes they were like, their parents had lived here, their whole family has lived there, and everybody is getting evicted.
How dare you, Gavin?
How
dare you?
Exactly. So I'm in the back like, oh, yeah, these tech people, guys, they're the worst. I'm like, oh no, I'm exactly
these people that come into town out of nowhere.
Exactly, and then take these jobs and then rent apartments for way too much money, price everybody out. And so Sophia moved from Atlanta. We moved together into a tiny 1-bedroom apartment. You saw the apartment in San Francisco. How would you describe it?
The thing that's missing from this that you haven't discussed is that you two wanted to get closer, and you moved 3,000 miles west. The idea was to get closer, and you were just like, hey, so I'm going to go learn this stuff. Peace. I'm out. and then you go 3,000 miles away for it's like Gilligan's Island, what started as a 9-week class that turned into 3 months. And so she eventually, you guys get together. It was, it's standard first apartment together stuff. One bedroom, a living room / kitchen that blends together.
Yeah.
But so while you're there, you have, I had the pleasure of visiting with you guys and staying there.
Yeah.
Something that was always present throughout all this, which we haven't really touched for you, is music.
Oh yeah.
So you've been a musician for, it's unfortunate for us saying this, decades. And I have as well. The music that from the podcast that we did together, you had just kind of thrown me a few ideas. You're like, yeah, I wrote these things. Here's some stuff. And so, so you wrote the music to the podcast and had always been playing here and there. I want to touch a project that I probably goes without mention for a while we're kind of bouncing around a little bit, which is at some point I get this insane message from you. And you tell me about this project that you're starting. Do you know where I'm going with this?
I don't actually know which project you're talking about, but I can't wait.
So I get this insane message, and you go, I want you to see something, because I have an idea. I'm going to take The Matrix, and I'm going to write an album that corresponds with the visuals of The Matrix.
Yeah, kind of like a Dark Side of the Moon to the Wizard of Oz.
Except on purpose.
And to The Matrix, yes.
Because you were going to... And so you got, as far as I knew, you got one song kind of into the 7 minutes or whatever it was, into The Matrix. But what was the idea?
I think I got about 3 songs into it until I realized, this is not easy. That's
the part I want to discuss, is not necessarily the starting it, because I think this far into the conversation, people can get a feel for who you are and kind of the immersion that you crave creatively. But I want to talk about why you stopped.
Oh, sure. It was something that I wanted to hear. Like, how come no one has done this? How come no one has made a weird concept record that syncs up with a movie? It started really fast, and then I got, I think, 2 or 3 songs into it. I was getting bored. If I'm getting bored with the way this sounds, everyone's going to get bored with it. And yeah, I guess after a while, I started putting my energy into other things. But it started off strong, and I felt like it was petering off. But it's funny that you mention it, because the very short version is I was in San Francisco for a few years with Sophia. She and I moved back here together in Baltimore because, prices are, it's not insane.
It's one heck of a suburb to move to from San Francisco.
I know. Most people move to the East Bay. We moved to the East Bay, the Chesapeake Bay, the far East Bay. And since then, I'm doing iOS development. I've been doing development ever since San Francisco, and software development, working remotely, which is great. I get to work from home in Baltimore, where things are way cheaper, and you can actually do things like save some of your money, which is nice.
Crazy thought.
Like these weird things. We got married, have a house, all these things that you just can't do. You can get married, but buying a house is a little bit trickier in San Francisco, unless you have it's like the median house price in San Francisco is like $3 million the last I saw.
That's intense.
Just some throwing around money. It's intense. But also, since I've moved back, I've started a new band with a friend of mine. At our last practice, we were talking about that Matrix concept, that idea. And my friend Josh said, well, didn't the Matrix, isn't 2018, are we coming up on the 20th anniversary of the Matrix? And so this Matrix concept record that I started working on was 10 years ago, because I was going to do it for the 10-year anniversary of the Matrix. And we actually broke out some of the old song files, and we're listening to it. So I don't know. It's as of right now, the idea is still dead. But all of these things that I've started, I keep them all, and I'll come back to them, and maybe I'll rework them and reuse them in other things. And instead of just abandoning them and never coming back to them, I'll pick ideas out of them.
I do the same thing where I've got, went to school as an audio engineer for, however many years ago at this point. And I've kept all of my multi-track recordings. Every now and then, for whatever reason, I'll fire up Pro Tools and I'll open up one of these sessions. And obviously, all of my plugins have lapsed and everything. The only thing that still remains is the recordings and their, how they place within the sessions. So every now and then I'll open up an old session and I'll just start remixing one of these tracks that I've got because I'm too. Why not? I'll just start it up. I still would consider in my mind, I would still consider these projects dead. However, it's still creatively you can go back and say like, oh, I wonder if I could. One of the nice things I guess about not being a professional audio engineer anymore on my side is that I can go open up these sessions and ask, or can I improve it? And at this point, with not doing it all of the time, the answer is definitively no. But it is a lot of fun to try.
Yeah.
To just open it up and kind of relive and like open up a guitar track or a drum track and be like, oh, I definitely messed that up. But it was one of my favorite parts about this project, whatever it might have been.
Do you find that when you go back to those projects, especially with music, I find this, that you're sort of mentally transported sometimes to the time and place where you recorded it, but more interestingly, kind of that mindset you were in. Like for me, if I'll listen to a piece of music or an old recording that I had from like 10 years ago, and I listen to it and I'm like, sure, it'll be rough around the edges, especially if it's something I didn't finish, but it kind of gets me back to how I was approaching it and how I was approaching music. It's a little bit like, it feels like time traveling into your own younger mind and kind of remembering the stuff that was really important to you or the things you were really trying to go after. Do you have anything similar?
I got a network attached storage in my apartment now, so I've
Nice.
been moving everything around and trying to categorize stuff as best I can. And I think kind of nerds do this throughout their lives, where you leave these breadcrumbs. The way I approach this has to have been this way, kind of rebuilding the project before you start again. Or even just like, to the degree of firing up your PS3 for the first time in a few years and trying to play Fallout New Vegas, and you're like, all right, where was I?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone can relate to that feeling of like going back and repurposing yourself.
I've also noticed something when going back to old work, whether it's for me, if it's a piece of fiction I'm working on, or now I've been doing iOS development for 4 years now. I don't know how that's possible, but going back and looking at like old code, listening to old music, there are things that I abandoned or thought were terrible that I go back in here now, even just with a few years later, I kind of realize like I have a tendency to be really hard on myself when it comes to creative projects, that even if I'm just, for the most part, making things for myself without any, for the most part, everything I do is just for the act of doing it. But there will be things that I just think are ridiculous and terrible, and that I will never show anyone or ever put out there. And then I come back 2 years later and I think, what if I just worked on it a little bit harder? I mean, there's something there. I just gave up too quickly because I got discouraged, or I was setting such a high bar for myself that I got discouraged that I would never achieve what that thing is. And in some cases, I just go for it, miss the mark, but it's this spectacular, great disaster in its own beautiful way. Like when we were talking about when to move on, there are sometimes like, all right, this is not working. I need to move on from this and spend my energy on something else. And then it seems to me like I don't really know. I'm not very good at figuring out on my own whether or not a project is worth pouring more time into and making better until I've had some distance between it. Like I'll go back and look at something or listen to something and say, like, I really should have pushed that a little bit harder because there's a good idea there. I find that when I'm collaborating with people, that helps me. Like when we were podcasting, we did a buttload of episodes. If I was doing that on my own, I wouldn't have. And when you have a good collaborator and someone who can help tell you, like, yeah, this is a thing that's good, or like, let's keep going for it. It gets better the more you do something. Like sometimes I think I'm not the best person to gauge whether or not I should abandon something or move on with it and keep putting more time into it.
If you're not talking about something that you professionally or kind of financially depend on, success isn't always something that can continue to drive a project. And I'm going to bring up a project of yours that had success that, I mean, at the moment does not continue on. I'm going to talk about the Apple TV app that you developed.
Oh, yeah.
So the Apple TV announced as it can have apps. And so what did you do? You immediately got down and you started working.
Yeah, and it was my first app. It was something that I wanted to have on my Apple TV. I wanted to have an app that would give me the video feed from the International Space Station. The space station has what they call the HDEV, the high definition something viewing, Earth viewing.
Earth viewer.
They love
Earth viewing or viewer, some of those things.
Yeah, they love their acronyms and initialisms at Apple. Apple, NASA, the other
NASA.
Oh, the other entity that has shaped my life.
In 2018, as we record this, the image that you get from that, I'm going to say, is far from high def with quotes that you would see. However, it's still pretty amazing that you can get live footage from the space station. And as far as I knew at that moment, it was not something that was possible. I was just like, oh, I'm sure it exists and there's footage, but like, I didn't know that there was something available to the public that would let you see what the space station was seeing. And so you tell me that there's that you've been working on an app for the Apple TV.
Yeah.
So I have to go out, if I want to see it, I have to go out and I have to buy the new Apple TV. And I did, to get into your beta program of how, the updates and all of that. But the App Store launches and suddenly, suddenly you're the number one paid app in the App Store of the Apple TV.
Yeah, and it was bananas. I had no right to be the number one app, paid app. Of course, it helped that the Apple TV was brand new, and I think that my biggest competitor was the Fireplace app, which is still that guy's going great. That's going great. But yeah, there was holiday going from 2015 to 2016. That we had just moved back. Yeah, I didn't have a job lined up yet, and so with all of my spare time, I was just building this app, and it just became my job for a couple of months building this thing, and it was this great combination of this just completely stumbling into a successful project while also simultaneously having no idea what I was doing. So it was great pride and sheer terror, kind of in equal parts. Because I remember, but my favorite thing about this app, the first version, it was essentially one button on the center of the screen. You clicked on the button, that video feed fills your whole TV. And it was great. 45 minutes of the Earth and 45 minutes of complete black because it was in nighttime and the cameras couldn't pick up city lights. So it's not currently on the store, but it's not because I really wanted to take it down. It was, I have it, it's just because it's associated with it. It's so dumb. The reason's so dumb. I have this, I have it tied up in a different Apple account that I switched things over because I was contracting for a terrible company that I created an LLC. They wouldn't hire me as a contractor to be a developer unless I was my own company, and I had no idea what I was doing setting that up. And so it's all, I just need to go into that other account, reactivate it with the $100 to Apple so I can get my apps, move it back over to my personal account. And then all I have to do is completely rewrite it from scratch, because that's one of those things that I go back and I look at that code and I'm like, it's nice to have this benchmark where I'm definitely quantifiably a better programmer than I was when I wrote that. So that app, I pulled it from the App Store, 6 months ago. People are still using it and still every day using it. I actually do know where they are. I have the metrics. A lot of them are in Europe. I have a lot of users in the Netherlands. For some reason, I'm not sure why. But yeah, it's in the back of my head. It keeps, every now and then I get this. I'll wake up at 3 a.m. like, I need to work on that. I need to make it better. I need to put it back in the store. People are counting on me. Why do I have to sleep?
So you've had a few projects that have developed into apps. You've had touching on the being there first. You had there was a Baltimore-based sticker app for iMessages.
Yeah,
I thought this was a lovely idea. It was the whole idea was a showcase of music that you had created along with images as well. So you've had all of these different projects, different careers, different lives over the last 10 years or so. I think there's something interesting in this desire to be immersed, and there's something I think we can all share in that. There's an interview that it really sticks with me that Patton Oswalt did years and years ago, and it's something that's really frustrated me mentally. I can't get past it, and that's this may be a problem that I have personally, but it's an interview that he gave, I think, to Wired magazine, where he's talking about how he's bemoaning, and he sounds like an old man doing so, bemoaning that if you're into something, everything is accessible at your fingertips, or you can possess all of the things. If you're into the Muppet Show, you can have every moment where a Muppet is on a screen somewhere. It doesn't mean that you've watched it, but it means that you can own it and you can be a part of that. But until you immerse yourself in that, until you live and breathe whatever it is, whether it's music, app development, writing, the Muppets, any of this, the Black Cauldron series of books, the Lord of the Rings, all of it, until you have actually lived it, all you do is you possess something. But when you immerse yourself in that experience, then suddenly you get it and it clicks. There was a kind of a pause in my professional life. And so I had this time in between applying and going on interviews, and there's only kind of so much that you can do in a day before you're mentally strained to find more to do, where I would sit down for for some time at just about every day and play some Destiny 2, where suddenly I went from being kind of not care. I owned the game, but I wasn't really into it. But suddenly now I'm watching YouTube videos of watching other people play, and I spend the time to grinding my second character and all of these throughout the game, and all of these things that are possible now with the time that I can spend to immerse myself. Whether it's a good idea that I should be immersing myself in other things or whatever, changes kind of my outlook as to just owning the game. And now it's a matter of kicks around in your head, and it becomes part of that creative process that you can have. So, for the thing that I see is all of the things that we've been talking about, they've existed throughout all of it. And it all kicks around, and it all becomes part of your process. Whether we know it or not, talking about the older projects, talking about the current projects, how you keep everyone keeps kind of ping-ponging between these few things that kind of define who you are as a nerd and as a person in general. As you grow creatively, professionally, you keep pulling through all of these strings and finding new stuff and incorporating it to become, what our ultimate work, to leave and say all right, this is done. That's definitely something that's interested me throughout everything, is to say, to live something and to live and breathe something and to incorporate that into how you move forward with things.
It's really funny how often the things that I learned as a writer, going back and refining a piece of writing, how can you say this in the fewest number of words possible? How can you edit and strip away the things that are extraneous, that maybe the lessons don't directly apply to programming, but that mindset does when I'm refactoring code? How can I say this in the fewest number of lines where it's still readable and makes sense? How can I make this function read like Hemingway wrote it? Just like strip out all of what are the coding equivalents to adverbs? It all finds ways to connect, and I don't ever really feel like anything is truly abandoned that way. I mean, if I've started projects that I didn't maybe quote unquote finish, but the work I did put onto it I carry that with me into whatever it is that I'm doing next. And whether it's just in the back of my mind or if it directly applies, I can take what I've learned about what works and about how I approach work and how I think things through, and it's all related, and it's something that I guess you just learn over time of trying and flailing and keep trying.
Yeah, it's the idea of when you don't have a deadline, when do you decide that something is finished? And I think the answer is never.
Yeah.
That work can always live on in different ways. And speaking of deadlines, we don't necessarily have one here. However, let's gonna do some be respectful of the listeners' time.
Oh yeah.
I want to thank you for coming on for the first episode of The Adult Nerd.
Rob, it's an honor. Thank you for inviting me, and I can't wait to hear the other episodes. This is such a great idea. Good luck. Best of luck. I'm going to subscribe as soon as you is it up? I know this is the first episode.
It exists. The site is up. There's some subscription
I mean, by the time
links.
People hear this, it'll be up.
Yeah, it'll be up, and it should be everywhere that you look for podcasts. If people wanna find you on the internet, Gavin, how do they find you?
People can find me, I guess, mostly. Where can you find it? Let's just say Twitter. Charm City Gavin on Twitter. That's the thing I've been on the longest and most consistently on. I don't have a website right now. Isn't that weird?
Sounds like a project.
Yeah, I know. That just exactly what I was just thinking. Thanks, Rob. Now I'm gonna do that. But yeah, Charm City Gavin on Twitter. You can find me there, and that's where I'll post links to whatever weird stuff I'm doing. I'm in the band I'm working on now. We're called Sky Tigers, and we have an Instagram, sky.tigers. We're posting a little bit of music there and recording some songs for what will be the first album. And the best part about having a partner working on this is that it will get finished, and we will put it into the world, because now I'm accountable. That accountability, that's a whole other podcast we can talk about sometime. But man, Rob, I hope somebody interviews you one time. Maybe we can turn the tables and talk about all of the cool projects you do. Because
all of the projects left in my wake.
Yeah, I mean, like you were, the way you were describing me, it's like exactly how I think about you and your projects. You're always doing something cool, and I would love to one day have the tables turned and hear you talk about all of this.
I'll take you up on that one day. So all of this stuff we've discussed today will, of course, be in the show notes available at theadultnerd.com. Everything will be, if your podcatcher is of quality, all the links may be in there as well. And I want to thank everyone for getting this far and listening. If for some reason you have listened to the entire interview and you've gotten to the end and you haven't already subscribed, well, do so. It's available pretty much wherever you want. What am I supposed to say? What's the way to say it? Rate, review, and subscribe. So do all those things, and we'll all go forward together on this project, and we'll all have a blast at The Adult Nerd. So, Gavin, once again, thank you.
Rob, thank you. Oh, sure. Yeah.
So that was the general worry, that the FCC was going to hear us and find the high school, and then that would shut down the whole radio program.
Oh, you had a high school radio program.
Yeah. We somehow had inherited a high school one.
That is cool. We had God, if my friends and I had a radio show or a radio station at our disposal in high school, it would have been. It's like the only thing we were missing. We were a bunch of theater kids running around the school after hours, getting in trouble, in band, just causing mayhem. But the teachers the arts teachers all secretly liked us. And
yeah, they've since moved it, but it used to be in the basement. The radio station was in the basement of the school. It was the only thing in the basement. The radio station and like the AV department together. So it was like you'd have to go to the end of the hallway, and there was the only thing down that hallway was the radio station. And there was just kind of an old lady who was like a secretary that worked there, and then the one teacher, and then occasionally it would fill up with kids, but you'd have to go by like the high school period system. So it'd be like your show was 42 minutes long, because then the bell rang and you had 4 minutes to get to your next class.
Oh, wow. So this was all during school hours?
Yeah, it was all we had the radio station during the school hours, and then the school day would end, and we would turn the broadcaster our broadcast off, and another high school would start their broadcast. So they had our shows were 42 minutes, their shows were like 3 hours. They definitely had the better system.
Yeah.
And it was that was the high school that Judd Apatow went to. So if you've ever heard the him interviewing Jerry Seinfeld on his high school radio station, which he did,
yeah,
it shared the frequency, and from what was it 8 a.m. until 3 p.m. it was WPOB, and then from 3 p.m. to 11 it was WKWZ. So.
But it was on the same frequency.
It was on the exact same frequency, and we shared. I don't even know if we shared a tower, but we literally we would be turning off our broadcast, and there would be a radio tuned to the station in the school, and then you would hear WKWZ turn on their broadcast, and they would start their broadcast day. But I assume there was a second or two of just white noise.
Yeah, because how do you coordinate that so perfectly, especially between high schools?
Right, they would have to have someone listening and ready to flip a switch to turn theirs on.
Was there a rivalry between the two high schools about the programming? Did you guys talk about each other on the air?
I didn't, and I don't think that they did, because they definitely knew they had. Theirs was definitely an after school activity, or ours we would have a period during the day that we would once a week that we would do, but at the same time they definitely had the better setup. There was no question about that. So I don't even think there was a debate. But we had your show would be on from 12:46 to whatever 42 minutes. It was chunks of 46 minutes, not 45 or hour long or half hour segments. So it would be this awful time frame. Listen here every week at 1:12 p.m. on Tuesday afternoons.
So, and I guess not a lot of your friends would be able to listen in, because some of them are probably in other classes.
Never. They would never be. And the other high school would have people that listened in and people that called. And the only people who would call in were they would be looking for they tuned into the radio station. They thought it was information about the school district. And meanwhile, it's me and a friend playing Black Sabbath songs.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what kind of show did you do?
They had a CD catalog in the station. However, you could bring in your own, but that meant bringing in a stack of 10 CDs on your radio show day.
Oh yeah.
So we had so it would be, and then you're thinking you think about it you're giving it's high school, so you're giving a 13 to 17 or 18-year-old like 42 minutes a week to make a mix every week.
Oh God, this sounds like a dream activity for 17-year-old Gavin.
Right. It was great as like as a high schooler, and I'm very thankful that there are no recordings.
You don't have any? That was going to be my next question.
No, it was like pre-stream. It was we couldn't, like, the idea of streaming wasn't even a thing yet. And then the radio, like, the only way to record it would have been on a cassette deck. But because you had the entire, you had half a year, I never really thought to, like, oh, we're going to record 26 shows this year, and I'll have the tapes, and then I'll listen to them and whatever. I was just like, yeah, having fun, going on. There was one year where I went on the air with a friend, and every week we would have a wrestling show. Like, that was the thing.
Oh,
we would
cool.
talk about the news and results and what was happening.
I did a wrestling radio show in college.
Perfect, yeah. And it was, I think we had a caller once, and that was it. But the only way to say you had a caller, it was the phone number for the radio station. So you would, Mrs. Weinstock Weinstein, I forget what her name was. Whatever her name was, would, like, knock on the glass and point to the phone, and you'd have to.
So she was like the light that was usually, like in a radio station, if a light blinks to let you know that there's a call.
Phone call on the air, no, and then to patch, because it never happened. It was like you'd have to go into someone would have to go into the other room to then patch them into the mixing board, because the main recording booth and, like, the production room were two different spots. Oh. It wasn't set up for phone calls, but, we had it once, and we were like, oh man, there's someone listening. There's one person.
That's a thrill. It must have been a thrill when you're in high school and learning all of this stuff, and someone from the outside world reaches in and acknowledges that you're doing a thing.
And not only that, but, like, it was a little weird because it's an adult.
Well, yeah, because everyone your age is in school.
Right. The only people who could listen who were part of the school were either on lunch and they had a radio for some reason, or
super fans.
They were home from school for being sick or whatever. And
so the rest were just adults out in the world.
Yep.
You kids got a radio show? Would you playing some Sabbath?
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate this conversation about the NWO, but I'd really like to hear "Gimme 3 Steps" by Lynyrd Skynyrd. Do you have that? Oh no, I left my CDs at home today, so that's why we're talking the whole time.
That's right, because you would have to bring them to school and have them with you probably all day.
I went through the effort of, because at the time, my parents' house, there was a stereo system hooked up to the TV. So if I really wanted to, I could take the time to record a promo from a Raw or a Nitro onto a cassette deck.
Nice.
And then play it on the air because we were going to talk about it. That was the real extent of what we could do.
That's pretty cool. So you could throw to a clip.
Yeah. Well, let's listen to Scott Steiner. Say whatever he's going to say. All right. I guess we should start this, huh?
Yeah. Or we can just start a wrestling podcast. I'm kind of ready.
That is true.
One more podcast. Two white guys talking about wrestling.